Thanks everyone for joining us this morning for our session on design and developer collaboration. Before we get into it, who are these people up on stage with you this morning? I am Matt Del Prado. I'm the head of design for the Jira integrations team, and one of our most important integration partners is Figma. So up with me today is
Emil. My name is Emil. I'm an engineering manager at Figma, and for the past 3 or so years have been leading our dev mode effort, which you'll hear a bit more about later today.
in a second. So today we're going to cover off a range of things with you. First, we're going to start talking about what the business impact of good collaboration between designers and developers leads to. We're going to talk about the 3 different kinds of development and design team models that exist and which one we think is best. We'll talk about some practical tools and tactics that can help you work no matter which of those models that you operate in. And then at the end, we'll be joined by a friend who will talk us through their journey going through a transformation in this space. But many of you will have joined us today. Presumably, you know a little bit about Atlassian and Jira, but you may not know as much about what Figma is. So before we get into it, Emil's going to take us through the story behind Figma.
Yeah, so what is Figma? As Matt said, many of you have probably heard of Figma, but it might just be kind of the tool you know that your designers draw stuff in. Well, Figma does a lot more than just allow designers to draw things in it. And especially over the past couple of years, we've really expanded in terms of who uses Figma and for what they use it. So the way we like to describe Figma is that it transforms the way teams design and build products together. And together is really kind of the key word here. It really brings your entire team together, whether you're in design, engineering, marketing, or even the legal department. Anybody who touches a product deserves to be in Figma and collaborate and help out to decide what you're going to build next. And for Figma, we have 3 tools in our suite that really work together to enable teams to collaborate in this way. The first is FigJam, which is our online collaborative whiteboarding tool. And this is really where teams start. Again, whether you're a PM, designer, developer, or anything else, you come to FigJam together to plan what to do next. You meet, you collaborate, and you decide on what those next steps are. And FigJam enables really anybody within your organization to provide input and align on those next steps. And this is great because you can all be aligned on day one instead of those misalignments kind of showing up later on. Once you have a plan for what to solve, teams move into Figma design. This is where those sticky notes in FigJam turn into high-fidelity mockups and prototypes. This is where you align on all those small design details and exactly what your application should do and what the specifications should be. Prototyping in Figma design also allows you to user test those changes and mockups before you move to building it. The process of doing this is still collaborative, just like in FigJam, because it's important to keep all those stakeholders along for this whole ride. And our latest addition to the Figma suite is Dev Mode. Dev Mode improves the collaboration and communication within your software teams and increases the product quality you're able to achieve by helping drive your design system adoption, as well as increasing the efficiency of your developer teams, helping them move from design to code faster. And of course, like you saw in that first picture, going from sticky notes in FigJam to code in Dev Mode is not a linear process. It's a circle, it goes back and forth, it's messy. And that's where the core collaborative nature of Figma really shines, because everybody can always be kept in sync. So, why is Matt here with me? Why are we here together? Well, the thing is, both Figma and Atlassian are on this really shared mission to enable entire product teams to work better together. And over the past year or so, we've partnered closely on making sure Jira and Figma, and especially Dev Mode, work better than ever before together, helping your teams focus on speed of delivery and improving the quality of your outcomes. You may wonder what Figma and Jira have to do with each other, because a lot of people think that Jira is this engineering tool where engineers live. And Figma, that's that tool for my designers where only designers live. But actually, we estimate roughly 10% of Jira users are designers. And around 30% of Figma users are developers. So there's a huge overlapping audience here. And these people want to collaborate more closely, and while still using all the tools they love, from Jira to Figma, etc. There's also an overlap, though, in use cases from these users. And this is where things start going a bit wrong, and actually why we've built some of the integrations we'll show later on. For example, people will obviously have Jira tickets for designs, like make that button green, round those corners a bit extra, things like that. And they'll screenshot things from Figma and put into Jira. And this works great until those designs are updated by the designer. And yes, they will be updated by the designer. Nothing's ever final. What happens now is you have information in two places. You have it in Jira, you have it in Figma, and your engineer thinks they're doing the thing the designer wants them to do, but the designer doesn't know that they're not looking at the latest thing. Now, two people are doing different things, and you don't notice this until it's too late. Really delays projects. You don't want this. You want a single source of truth. And the same is true from information from Jira into Figma, where we see people use comments in Figma to tell the developer what to do. When this shopping cart is empty, make sure this button is disabled. This is typically information that's also in Jira, so we don't want to duplicate it in Figma. But people do, or did at least, before the integration we've launched. Anyways, you'll hear much more about these integrations later on. I'm going to hand it back over to Matt to tell you a bit, kind of step back, tell you a bit about why we're solving these things.
So as designers and developers, we obviously would prefer to enjoy our day-to-day and work together better, but what is the business impact that happens when designers and developers are collaborating really well? We think it roughly boils down to both product speed and product quality. And when we say speed, we don't mean just a few minutes saved here and there. We mean that there's a difference in months. It's not just saving a few clicks in your work through, it's better aligning the entire direction of your project and your teams. And likewise with quality, it's not just about the individual pixels, it's the purpose and how that manifests in building the right thing for your customers. It's not just, do these two elements align on the page correctly? And as a designer, I care deeply that these two elements align on the page correctly, but it's about more things than that. It's about making sure that we're building the right things for our customers. So let's start with speed. What kind of things in the developer-designer relationship can really slow down or speed up the velocity of a team? Well, the first is the age-old problem of a source of truth. It's almost a meme now in the design communities to see a version 11 final and then a version 12 appear afterwards. This is pretty common. It's a running gag for over a decade. You'd think we would have solved it by now, but it still comes up in daily work all the time. Now, both Figma and Jira have solved this problem by having a single source of truth, be that be a Jira issue or be that be the Figma designs, and the ability to go back through version histories to see what's been changed. So you're linking to a single thing and being able to see all the history of it. But the problem still can come back in. It's not uncommon for designers to export an image out of Figma and then attach that PNG to the Jira issue, which then is immediately out of date, or putting different implementation details into Figma or into Jira, depending on who the author was, designer or developer. So although we've reduced it, we've still got two different sources of truth. Secondly, there's the fidelity of the communication between the different crafts. People hold different assumptions in their head, and it's really easy to think that the other person is thinking the same thing as you are. For example, what should be in this dropdown? Especially when things are particularly easy or commonplace, it's not unusual for the designer to just assume that everyone would understand what's in there, and for the developer to assume the same thing, but have that list not be exactly the same. So someone could spec out exactly what should be in that list, but then that's an extra step and that takes extra time. And where do you draw that line? Well, in our experience, you draw that line based on the relationship between design and development in that team. It's different for everyone. So you only need as much fidelity in your communication as you need, but no more than that. And finally, parallelism. You can move faster in a team when work can be parallelized to the right degree. Specialists can work without blocking the team. One designer can support many in-flight projects, and sub-teams can form and unform to get different amounts of work done as the project calls for, rather than based on the org chart. But the more distant that design is from development, the riskier this can be. Chopping and changing and context switching, particularly between the designer, can lead to really easy common mistakes. And so, again, this is something you want to try and achieve, but if you go too far, it can have the reverse effect. So that's speed. It's not just about speed, though. It's also about the quality of the work that comes through this relationship. The secret to exceptional products, as you'll read in every book on product design or development, is iteration. The first version of something is almost never the best. You will iterate towards perfection over time. And speed obviously unlocks a lot of the potential here for iteration. But it's not just the raw speed that does this. Just because your team is developing twice as quickly doesn't mean that you will necessarily just get 2 iterations where another team would have gotten 1. It depends on the collaborative nature between the designer and the developer and how fast and ad hoc they can do things like that. So it's not just your raw velocity that will make a difference. And one way that shows up really quickly is when you are trying to feel your design as fast as possible and not just look at it. Feeling beats seeing every time. It is really easy to get better and better at imagining how a design or a flow will feel to an end user by looking at specifications. But then nothing beats being able to quickly see what that feels like as soon as you get it in your hand, so to speak, even if that's with just a mouse and a cursor. And so here we're talking about prototyping, like Figma is incredible at for designers to build their own prototypes. But there are times when it makes sense to go into a full coded prototype and engage between a designer and developer to see if something is working. And that's the kind of benefit that can come from a relationship when the designers and developers are working much closely together. And when you've got a really good prototype, be that built from Figma or from code, you're going to feel pain points faster and then smooth those rough edges, and you're going to discover technical challenges sooner rather than later before they derail the project. And finally, purpose. What do we mean by purpose when it comes to quality? Sure, we've all heard that a team being aligned on its purpose can make a big difference to your sense of belonging or your teaminess and your cohesion as a group. But how does this directly translate to quality of product? Well, let's use a small hypothetical example. Imagine you are building a streaming service for New Zealand. As a group, you've probably identified some of the big challenges that are going to come up from this. We only have access to Series 5 of this entire bingeable TV series. How are we going to help users catch up on what they're missing? Are we going to be able to ensure that they're not getting spoilers from the US before it makes its way to our region? You've wrestled with some of these big problems. But what you probably haven't dealt with is the fact that everyone having a sign up to this service will probably have to put in their country of origin still as they go. And as the designer is worried about some of the bigger problems to wrestle with, they're probably not going to spec out the country drop-down list on the sign-up form. But with a team that's fully aligned on purpose and knowing what really matters, a developer can catch really quickly that New Zealand is very buried down in this list, and we know that 95% of our customers are going to be from there. Why not we just move this to the top? And in an environment where designers and developers have high trust and high iteration, little changes like this can be made ad hoc without additional large loops or design sign-offs. They can just be made because everyone understands the purpose and understands their customer. Now, this is a tiny little detailed example, and you can see how lots of those little things added up can feel quite important. But when these are applied to the core aspects of your product, that's when things really can take off. So we've spoken about speed and quality, and we've promised to go through some examples of tools and tactics that you can apply to help your teams in these environments, but we can't jump straight to there just yet. First, we need to talk about how your design and development teams are actually set up and orged with each other. So today, we're going to refer to 3 models for design teams. This is an intentional oversimplification. Not everyone exists in just one of these things. There's blurriness around the edges. And we have also found that everyone believes that their setup is the common normal one, no matter what that is, or they're not even aware of the other models that can exist. So the 3 are an agency model, a studio model, and an embedded model. So what do those mean? The agency model is when you have a centralized design team across your entire organization. This centralized team can be great for designers to become a center of excellence for design craft. And it's a great way to get a lot out of a smaller pool of design resources. They typically finish any particular project that they're working on and then hand it back to the feature team that briefed them on the particular need. And it's a great way to keep the vision for a large, complex project or product suite together so that everything is very cohesive. It very much favors that kind of single vision mentality. The studio model is when a group of designers get closer to a group of feature teams. Small groups of designers dedicated to a particular domain or area that have multiple feature teams delivering on it. They don't typically have to finish the entire project as much before it's ready for development. They can hand over in pieces or discrete phases to get everyone moving, and they can remain close by for questions and support much more easily than in the agency model. This has the advantage of turning designers into subject matter experts for the domain that they're focused on, be that a technical domain or a particularly important end-to-end journey, where the team of designers can see what that looks like from beginning to end and bounce in and out of projects to affect it while keeping the whole thing in mind. And finally, the embedded model, where a designer or designers are dedicated to a single team. Handover is very early, and some teams get to the point where they can start together, as the agile practice sometimes says, where back-end work begins while the front-end UI is still being worked out. This creates an environment where iteration can be extremely tight, and it allows questions and answers to be fed back very, very quickly, but it does leave the problem of cross-team alignment to the design team to go work outside of these teams. If your designer is thinking of their feature team as their home team, they then have to go elsewhere to work with other designers to try to keep the big picture in mind. So it's a trade-off as to where the optimization can occur. And so while all these models have their time and place, and there's different efficiencies to why an agency might be right for you versus embedded, broadly, we believe that the embedded team has the best impact when it comes to speed and quality, which is something that every product team in the world cares about. The question loops are tighter, the iteration can be faster, and it is much easier to align a team on their purpose when it includes all of the crafts together, not just one group that's trying to work out one version of a purpose versus another group that has a slightly different image in their mind. But you can't move from agency to studio to embedded simply by moving some desks around or updating the org chart. Many of us have probably seen a similar kind of transformation play out where a team decides to move from being waterfall to being more agile. So what do you do as first step? Well, first, you start doing a daily stand-up because that's definitely going to make you more agile. Instead of estimating in hours or days, we call those things story points instead because that's far more agile-y. And instead of a boring to-do list, we now use a board, and that definitely makes us agile as well. And you can rubber stamp yourself and know that you've achieved that agile transformation that you've always wanted to. Anyone that's worked in that kind of environment knows how far that can fall from the goal that you're trying to get to. Be that because you're still not ready to make changes in the product direction and pivot as you learn more, or to be able to take feedback from customers quickly, you haven't actually transformed your way of working into an agile model, just your dressing around the outside. And so it can go with being an embedded team. In fact, we predict that many, many product teams around the world are orged like an embedded team, but are still acting like a studio or agency when it comes to handoff of their phases. So just because teams are sitting together doesn't mean they've fully achieved that embedded way of working. All right, we've talked about problems with speed and quality. We've talked about how teams are set up. Now let's talk about some actual tools and tactics that can help you no matter which one of these team models that you're embracing. And for that, I'm going to hand back over to Emil.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, if only it was that easy. Change some letters, change some words, and you're agile. You work in embedded teams. It's not, though. So let's talk about how you can actually use some of the tools we offer within the Atlassian and Jira ecosystem, as well as the Figma ecosystem, to implement some of these learnings and help achieve a more embedded way of working, where you can ship higher quality products and bring more efficiency to your teams. So you may have heard of the term shifting left in DevOps, right? It's really about making your teams more efficient and getting to better outcomes. So we've kind of adapted that here to shifting right? Shifting to the embedded model. And we believe, as Matt said, that it can really help do the same for you that shifting left did for DevOps, where it can make you more efficient and lead to better outcomes. And now, while that is a cultural shift, while that is a process shift, as Matt was talking about, we do believe tools can help make this easier. So tools can't do everything, right? You have to have something else there as well. But now I thought I'd go through some of the tools that you can use. I'm going to start with what we believe are the tools best suited if you're currently operating more like an agency. So first, let's think about the main problems that this agency way of working is facing today. And that's communication, or often lack of communication, especially between the designers and the development teams. Like Matt was saying, in an agency model, you're typically doing those designs often organizationally in some very different place, geographically different place, and obviously often a temporally different place where things are designed but not implemented until a year later. And this really harms communication. So, what can we use to help improve that handoff and give developers as much information as possible? The first thing I want to call out is prototypes. Prototypes in Figma, and especially some of the new advanced prototyping features we've launched in the past year, really help your design teams articulate the details of a design. Instead of just a static mock-up that, hey, this looks like this, a prototype can tell your developers how it works as well. It can tell your developers where that button should go when you click on it, or what happens to this button when the shopping cart is empty. It should become disabled maybe, or when you add 10 items to your shopping cart, fireworks should blow up, right? The prototypes can really help articulate this in a way that's much more engaging than, say, a 10-page PRD. The second thing I want to talk about is annotations. And this is probably the first time you're hearing about this today, because this doesn't exist yet, but it is coming soon, and it'll be coming to dev mode early next year. So annotations is something I'm personally super excited about, and this is the first time we're talking about it publicly. But annotations help designers spec out every little detail about a design. So here you can see we're speccing out the size of that icon, but we can also use these kind of red pills to specify dimensions or spacing or really anything you can think of that's kind of a dimension or a pixel value. But we can do a lot more than that. We can also use annotations to highlight certain properties that are important to you. For example, highlighting this should be 11 pixels exactly in font size, or this has to have a 12 pixel border radius. This allows you to really spec out the design and every minutia of it in detail, so you can be confident that the right thing is developed the first time and not like the fourth time, right? This saves you months, not minutes, like Matt was talking about. And lastly, we believe automation can be a really powerful tool. Designers really need to stay aware of what is going on within the engineering process. And automation can really help them close that communication loop between designers and developers. And it helps them stay on top of changes. So when something happens in engineering, and it may be something went wrong, designers or PMs can catch it when it happens and not during the QA process, when it's typically too late. So using automations in the Jira platform, you can set up so that when something's marked ready for development in Figma, that will trigger a workflow where that ticket associated with that exact design gets moved into the correct board in Jira. And when the developer's done developing that, and puts up a pull request for it, that triggers a secondary workflow to notify the designer that that work has now been done. And all this, if using the integrations we've built together, is automatically linked between Figma and Jira, which is great. So those are some of the tools agencies can use. And of course, whether you're a studio model today or an embedded team, you can use these tools as well. We think these work extra well for agencies. And Matt's going to talk about some of the tools we believe work extra well for embedded or studio teams,
So a studio team is slightly closer together than an agency team. Things are moving faster. Designers can be reached more easily for questions if some have arisen. And things are not always 100% locked in before they enter development. So what's different and what can we offer of value here? Well, very recently the teams have launched an integration for Figma into Jira that really solves that version 11.png problem. Now, instead of attaching an image outputted from Figma to your Jira work, you can attach the actual Figma integration directly to your Jira issue, which can be explored from Jira, panned around and zoomed in or out, and when you need to go deeper, you can dive straight into the Figma file there. So now we're back to a single source of truth. And in addition to that, you can see in the bottom corner there, design updated. That alerts an individual user of Jira whether the Figma file has been updated since they last looked at it, which gives them another opportunity to catch when a designer has made an update to something that they might have already thought they had finished or that had changed since the sign-off meetings earlier in the week. That can then be connected to the automations engine that Emil was talking about earlier. And on the Figma side, as alluded to before, there is a feature now called Ready for Development. This allows you to mark any section, group of frames, or any particular parts of a design as now being done from a design point of view. So in an environment where you're bouncing backwards and forwards quickly and perhaps iterating very closely together, it can still be unclear which bit's entirely done and which bit's not. And one of the most common questions we hear between designers and developers is, hey, is that ready yet? And this really solves that problem with the designer being able to mark a particular change as ready for development. And that action taken in Figma, where you mark something as ready for development, can trigger actions inside of Jira. And that means moving an issue from in design to ready for development, or it can mean alerting any number of other people, or any custom automation that you build that is right for your team. And finally, now that you're being alerted about all these changes that are happening, wouldn't it be good if you could see the difference so you didn't have to comb through the file to understand what had changed? And Figma gives you this really powerful compare changes engine that allows you to not only look at the entire design or an entire frame, but drill down to a specific element and understand all the properties about that element that has changed, allowing a developer to get up to speed with what's changed in design incredibly quickly without the need for any additional meetings. So what can we do now to help embedded teams?
Yeah, embedded teams, again, similar to studio compared to agency, embedded teams compared to studio teams move even faster and have even fewer processes. And they just communicate a lot, get input from their whole team constantly on an hourly basis. And there's definitely no such thing as a final design here. It's changing every hour. As you know, the designer just gets a feeling. They change it, it's fine. Because they have that high level of communication, so that works. So is Figma and Jira, does it work for these teams as well? And the answer is yes. Especially the really collaborative nature of Figma works great. And this extends to dev mode. So we call it multiplayer in Figma, and this is really at the heart of Figma, FigJam, dev mode, really all our products. And it enables you to see changes live as they come in and propose changes and comment in real time. This is, again, really at the heart of Figma and why teams love Figma so much. And the best part is you never have to question, is this the latest version? Because you're all looking at the same thing and it's always the latest version. And that's at least my favorite part. So this is actually, though, very different from how handoff has worked historically. Historically, handoff has kind of been like, here's a PDF output of my design file, a snapshot in time, work off of this. And that worked in a time when there were no design updates. There was no iteration. That PDF never got out of date. But on modern teams, and especially those working in an embedded model, as I said, those changes happen on an hourly basis. I mean, you could hire somebody to re-export the PDF, but that seems painful. So with dev mode, we're really taking a different approach and making sure you're always seeing the latest thing and seeing the same thing. But still, like Matt was saying, we'll let you compare those changes and see what happened. Next, this is my favorite part of what we've built together, which is raising Jira tickets within dev mode. This allows me to jump in with my designer and my PM directly in dev mode and start speccing out what needs to be done in the design file just by pointing, clicking, and writing a quick description. So I no longer need to figure out how to link all the URLs. I don't need to screenshot designs. I don't need to describe the designs in Jira tickets and have multiple browser windows. I can simply use the integration in dev mode, and it handles all of that behind the scenes. Make sure it's synced, live, and up to date. Lastly, developers on embedded teams love code snippets in dev mode. These allow them to customize dev mode to the language and framework that they use, so they can implement and test variations of the design in code super quickly. And more advanced teams even implement their own translations from design to code that integrate through the plugin framework inside of Figma, allowing them to move even faster. To talk about how it is working on an embedded team, I'm super excited to welcome Naman Tariq from Ikea.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm part of the design system team at Ikea, and as a result, we work very closely in Figma and other places. I have a short story for our transformation. So this is the snapshot of how things looked when I joined the team about a couple of years ago. We had designers, we had a design system. It was primarily for web platforms, and there was a pipeline. Designers would design things up front, as we you heard earlier. And then it would be handed over to developers, and they would develop. But at one point where I joined the team, we decided to add support for mobile native platforms as well. The cool thing that was happening at the time was we had all the specs for mobile platform already in place, right? So we could really speed up to catch up to where web platform already was. However, during all of this journey, and our goal was to reach feature parity with mobile development so that now we have all the features available on Figma, web, and mobile native. However, during this journey, we had some challenges. Every time we had questions from mobile development point of view, because the designs were originally done for web, right? So we always had to go back to see, okay, how would this work for a mobile native platform? And we realized we had to find the person who worked on it. And that person could have worked on it 2 years ago and may have forgotten some things or forgotten the why things are the way they are. So knowledge was very siloed. Only few people know the details of different parts of the solution, of the product. Changes were really costly because if we identified issues now for mobile native and they needed to be fixed, they had to go all the way back to design, and then we have to coordinate releases for web and mobile and Figma and make sure they're all documented and that the wider organization is aware of what changes are coming and why we're making them. So everything became costly. Since the product already existed, the multiple dimensions of work was really, really weird. We had to do feature development, we had to do maintenance, we had to do fixes, we had to do security, we had to do support, and all different platforms had different needs for all of these different dimensions of work as well. And lastly, it took way too long to release anything, right? Because essentially, it shouldn't be I shouldn't have said long development cycle, it's essentially long feedback loops, right? Because we release when we release, but its design could be a year earlier, and now the feedback is coming a year later, and that's not good. So here's the story we have. I have a little bit of story here, which is last summer, we work in Sweden and Amsterdam, and so most of the team was away on vacations. And as a result, only few of us were working. The second star that aligned for this work was that for the very first time for the design system team, we were working on a new component which never existed for web before today. So now we're developing a new component that is new for web, for mobile, and doesn't exist in design yet as well. Normal ways of working are a bit suspended due to summer, so we just started working together with each other, with designer, mobile devs, web devs, all working in Figma, using multiplayer, designing things. We treated Figma and design as just another platform that we ship on, right? So we would decide another aspect of the component, and then we would go and work in Figma and in code at the same time, and then next day come back and show it to each other and iterate over this. And then we started releasing it and got feedback. A really interesting thing happened. We released the first version of this component and got bad feedback, and we threw it away because it was only 2 weeks worth of work. Happy to throw it all away, start over from scratch. And then we did another iteration, which was very well received, and then we started iterating over that. So what you see here in terms of guiding principle is essentially a bit of a revisionist history, because this is not the guiding principle we started off in this journey with, right? We just started off in this kind of an informal way of working, and then kept evolving and iterating not just our product, but our ways of working, only to end up looking back with these guiding principles, right? That we ended up removing handovers from our process. Design and development happen at the same time now because the tools enable us to do the same thing. Faster feedback loops, right? We ship often and we ship unfinished work so that we can show it to the relevant people and get that feedback in. Right? That was a big thing, to ship unfinished work. The team owns delivery. There is no one person responsible for documenting anymore, and there's no one person responsible for support and maintenance. The team owns the whole delivery for all platforms, for all sources of work. And we focus more on building the right thing. And lastly, lightweight process. We found out that we were changing our minds so often that any tickets we wrote were out of date in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time. So then we said, why write them in the first place? So we stopped writing tickets altogether. And we only write tickets when we need them. So we removed a lot of bureaucracy from our process along the way, right? We still do use the tools, and we still document our development and design and development process, but it's kind of a just-in-time principle now, right? So this is what we ended up with, right? We have a much more improved product knowledge in the team because not one person is aware of it. Now 5 to 6 people are aware of it. Changes are cheaper, we can change our mind quite often, we have shorter feedback loops, and it has improved our ability to respond to changing needs in the organization accordingly. Thank you.